Shane Arden.
Mr Speaker, thank you, and it is a privilege and a pleasure to rise in the second reading of the Psychoactive Substance Bill. The National Party obviously is sponsoring, supporting it and want to see it passed as soon as possible. On the Health Select Committee, and I must acknowledge my colleagues on the Select Committee from both sides of the House and the great chairmanship of our very good chairman, Dr Paul Hutchinson, on this particular issue, who brought actually quite a high degree of expertise actually to the debate, given his medical background. Mr Speaker, when you look at something like we are considering here, or when the House considers something like it is considering here, not you entirely, Mr Speaker, there are a range of different arguments that you can put forward, and the previous Speaker, who just resumed her seat, brought forward a lot of the constituent type issues that each and every one of us have experienced since this became a common thing. There was an example right in my own electorate in the Stratford area where my good colleague and friend, the Honourable Chester Burrows, took it upon himself as a Member of Parliament and a former police officer to visit a dairy and suggest to them that it wasn't in their best interest, or certainly not in the best interest of the young people of our area, for them to be selling this substance. And they just said, well, it's legal, so we make money from it. I'm reminded of a very heartfelt submission we received from the Mayor of Ashburton area, where she brought forward a very good submission, in my opinion, of the type of investment that some of the, retailers of this product were making and the type of returns they may get from it. So all of that leads to a sort of a discussion about, well, why don't you just ban it? Why don't we just pass law and make it illegal? Well, as most in the House will be aware, Mr Speaker, when you put in place a total prohibition, it seldom works. In fact, if you look back in our history, you'll find that the King Country, an area I represent, in the late 1940s, early 50s, decided they were going to introduce a prohibition on alcohol. There were more moonshine distilleries and underground clandestine activities than... I'm not surprised by that, Mr Mallard. That doesn't surprise the House at all. In fact, we've often wondered about what type of psychoactive substance might have been employed. But the reality is that prohibition seldom works. It tends to drive these type of activities underground, and the end result is that you don't end up with the outcome that community that wanted it banned in the first place might see as the ultimate outcome. So with all of those issues and all of that as a problem for the government, it's where the rubber actually does meet the road. The Health Select Committee listened to a substantial body of evidence that would suggest that if the onus of proof as to the safety or otherwise, the lack of harm, the minimisation of harm from these substances could be placed on the manufacturers, and that could be properly policed and checked regularly by an expert panel which will be set up as a result of this, then the outcome for this outcome would likely be much better. The member asked a very good question. Why would the member want to kill dogs? Well, there are some different individuals that we would like to try these substances on. Dogs is not one of them. The argument about animal welfare is one that I think most New Zealanders will be concerned about. But the member needs to take a look at what the expert panel membership looks like. And what he will find is on that panel is the head of SPCA. And now if the member doesn't understand that SPCA are the organisation in New Zealand that looks after the welfare of animals along with a lot of concerned people, why would you not take the advice of that body as opposed to someone baying from the other side of the House about the misuse of animals? If the member were to care to look at the substance of the bill, he'll find that even though that may possibly happen, there may be animals used in testing, all other testing systems will be exhausted before that happens. So what the member needs to probably have a closer look at, and clearly hasn't to this point, is what is the makeup of the expert panel that will make recommendations on whether or not a substance is of minimum harm, and what are the likely chances of animals being used in the testing process to determine that outcome. I don't know whether the member is suggesting, because I wouldn't even attempt to suggest that member might suggest this, that perhaps this experimentation should take place on young people as opposed to animals. No, well, I would have been surprised if the member had been suggesting that. But if you can't test something to a point where you can establish that it has minimum harm without using animals, then what would the member suggest happen?
That it not be approved.
That it not be approved. So that the substance actually then be made available without that evidence that it is of minimum harm, and it can be experienced, it can be experimented on society. How do you know whether or not the minister? How would the minister or the expert panel advising the minister know whether the substance is of minimum harm without thorough testing? And so the member over there baying, who suddenly has a newfound love for dogs or other animals,
Order.
as it may be, may go and have a look at what the
Order.
The member has been breeding dogs for 40 years. Well, I've been farming for that long, and I know the member wouldn't understand, but farming requires humane treatment of animals, and there's plenty of other people that have been training and breeding dogs for that long as well. So he doesn't have a unique franchise on that. And I've no doubt if that member has been breeding dogs for 40 years and lives in an urban environment, there would have been several animal welfare issues in the activity that the member has been involved in, because you cannot breed dogs in an urban environment without creating such an animal welfare environment. So well, there we go. Because he has his own. The member has his own, obviously, animal welfare expertise, and I'd suggest that the member knows about as much about that as he knows about the bill that he's interrupting on. So, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that this bill ends up in a situation where the best attempt at minimising risk to society, to young people in particular, has been achieved by going through the process that we have. There are a number of other issues that I care to touch on, Mr. Speaker, and one of them is the fact that there has been for a long time a range of very suspect processes in terms of the production of these products, particularly party pills, which are becoming more and more common. I think the previous member that spoke, who made a lot more sense than the one that's interrupting, said that the advent of hospital treatment and admission has substantially increased in the period since 2010, and there was a high degree of evidence to back that up. So what's changed since 2010? Well, what's changed, Mr. Speaker, is the number of these organisations that are producing this product, the amount of money they're able to make by selling it, the number of outlets that exist that trade in it, the, I guess, societal acceptance that this is going to happen, other than, of course, in the case that I mentioned earlier, where society have said, we don't accept that this should happen in our area, we don't accept that our dairies should sell it, and they boycotted that premises, and I understand that at least on the front they have stopped selling it. Whether or not it's still happening in a way that's not so public, I'm not sure. But certainly that is one way that those that feel so strongly about it could do something about it, and that is to boycott those that are, of course, making this available, particularly to young people. But this law, or this bill, once it becomes law, will, Mr. Speaker, give some certainty to the, I guess, the safety of legal products. It will place the cost of that proof of burden on those that produce it, and it will, Mr. Speaker, help substantially in bringing about a change of behaviour particularly amongst young who have been severely affected by it. Mr Speaker, I support the bill.
The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Mr Speaker, thank you very much, and I'm pleased to take the opportunity to have a short call on this